In the shadow of a world driven by endless demand, the sea lanes carried the lifeblood of nations. Ships became floating titans of industry, loaded with the minerals and chemicals that fueled war and peace alike. Without these steel giants slicing through the waves, the modern world would never have risen. But every voyage came at a price, paid in the lives of crews who trusted thin hulls and volatile cargoes, where a single spark or a moment of collision could turn the harbor into an inferno. Tonight we descend into three of history's most devastating ship disasters: Whiddy Island, Halifax, and Texas City, where the hunger for cargo invited disaster and the flames claimed their due. January 8th, 1979. A quiet winter morning on Bantry Bay was shattered by one of the most devastating industrial disasters in Ireland's history. The MV Betelgeuse, a massive crude oil tanker, was docked at the Whiddy Island oil terminal. The ship had arrived to unload its cargo, over 100,000 tons of crude oil, after a delayed voyage. This offshore terminal, built in the 1960s, was designed to handle supertankers. At the time of the incident, the ship had already begun unloading its cargo on January 6th, and it was expected to take about 36 hours to complete the operation. But early on January 8th, something went terribly wrong. Around 1 a.m., a loud cracking noise was heard. Then, the Betelgeuse erupted in a massive explosion. The explosion split the ship in two. Flames tore through the wreck, reaching temperatures over 1,000 degrees Celsius. The blast was so powerful it was felt miles away, and debris was thrown into the sea. Flames engulfed the Betelgeuse and the nearby offshore terminal. The explosion killed 50 people, including 41 crew members of the ship, 8 terminal workers, and 1 other person. Some were killed instantly, others in the aftermath of the blast. The remote location of Whiddy Island made rescue efforts difficult. The fire burned for hours and, by the time the flames subsided, the Betelgeuse had sunk to the bottom of the bay. Recovery operations were delayed by thick smoke and hazardous conditions. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that divers were able to begin the difficult task of searching for bodies and determining the cause of the explosion. The terminal at Whiddy Island was never reopened after the disaster. The cleanup costs were significant, and the economic impact was felt for years. A government investigation revealed that a combination of factors led to the explosion, including poor maintenance of the ship, errors in unloading the oil, and problems with safety procedures at the terminal. The disaster left a lasting mark on the community of Bantry Bay. 50 lives were lost that morning, and the event raised serious questions about safety standards in the oil industry. December 6, 1917, 8:45 a.m. At the busy harbour of Halifax, Nova Scotia, workers, sailors and residents were starting a normal morning as ships moved through the narrow channel called the Narrows. Then, without warning, 2 ships collided. In an instant, the entire city of Halifax was changed forever. What no one realized was how dangerous one of those ships truly was. The French vessel SS Mont Blanc was loaded with a deadly mix of wartime explosives, picric acid, TNT, benzol and gun cotton, one of the largest floating stockpiles of explosives ever allowed into a civilian harbour. As the ships scraped together, sparks ignited the benzol barrels on deck. A fire began to burn uncontrollably, turning the Mont Blanc into a floating time bomb. Then at 9:03 a.m. it happened. A blinding white flash erupted over the harbour. In an instant, the Mont Blanc vaporized in a fireball, hurled debris miles away, and created a shockwave felt over 200 kilometers away. The explosion shattered windows 50 miles out, lifted a 3,000-ton ship out of the water, and flattened entire neighborhoods in seconds. The immediate aftermath was unimaginable. A massive fireball ignited the city. A 15-meter tsunami crashed into the shore. Over 12,000 buildings were damaged or destroyed. Nearly every structure in the Richmond district was gone. The human cost was staggering: approximately 2,000 people killed, around 9,000 injured, and tens of thousands left homeless in the freezing winter. As night fell, a fierce blizzard struck on December 7th, burying the ruins in deep snow and hampering rescue efforts. Searchers worked through the storm, pulling survivors from the wreckage and recovering bodies. Temporary shelters housed the displaced, while aid poured in from across Canada, the United States, and Britain. The investigation later revealed the full truth. The explosion was triggered by the collision and subsequent fire aboard the Mont Blanc, but it was made catastrophic by miscommunication, navigational mistakes, and the lack of proper warnings about the ship's explosive cargo. The terrifying detail: almost no one in Halifax knew they were living beside a floating arsenal powerful enough to destroy a city. The Halifax explosion remains one of the largest accidental non-nuclear explosions in history, and a stark reminder of how small decisions, simple errors, and overlooked dangers can unleash unimaginable destruction. April 16, 1947. At the port of Texas City, Texas, dock workers were beginning a routine morning, preparing to load cargo and checking manifests, when thick smoke began rising from a ship in the harbor. Then, without warning, the French cargo ship SS Grand Camp exploded. In an instant, Texas City was changed forever. The Grand Camp was carrying approximately 2,300 tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, a material widely considered stable and safe for transport at the time. It had been shipped countless times before, yet few fully understood how volatile it could become when subjected to intense heat and confinement. A fire had started deep in the ship's hold, possibly from a discarded cigarette. Instead of unloading the cargo, the crew sealed the hatches to smother the flames, trapping heat and pressure inside. On the docks, workers and spectators gathered, watching firefighters battle the blaze. Some even climbed nearby buildings for a better view, unaware they were standing beside a bomb. Then, at exactly 9:12 a.m., the ship detonated, leveling the waterfront. The blast unleashed a shockwave felt up to 150 miles away, ignited nearby refineries, and propelled a mushroom cloud over 2,000 feet into the air. Nearly 16 hours later, as fires raged unchecked aboard the nearby SS High Flyer, started by flying debris from the first explosion, its cargo of ammonium nitrate reached the breaking point. At 1:10 a.m. on April 17th, the second ship exploded, sending fresh waves of destruction through the night. The aftermath was apocalyptic. Entire city blocks were flattened, nearly 1,000 buildings damaged or destroyed, ships hurled inland, and fires burned for days. Texas City's port was effectively erased. The human cost was catastrophic. At least 581 people killed, including all but one of the city's 28 volunteer firefighters who perished in the initial blast, thousands injured, and about 2,000 left homeless, marking one of the deadliest industrial accidents in U.S. history. Investigations by the U.S. Bureau of Mines and Coast Guard uncovered a terrifying truth. Ammonium nitrate, when subjected to intense heat and confinement, can detonate with enormous force. Safety standards were vague, warnings were poorly understood, and emergency responses were dangerously misinformed. The Texas City disaster remains a grim lesson etched in fire and steel. Even materials labeled safe can turn deadly when knowledge falls short. Warnings go unheeded, and caution is abandoned. Unearthed hidden history. Unearthing new stories weekly. Follow or subscribe for more.